Do you think Sri Lanka's debt is sustainable or unsustainable, and how much of it do you think can be attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic? And most importantly, Professor, what advice would you give to a country facing balance of payment problems and a debt crisis simultaneously?
Thank you. The position Sri Lanka is in is not unique. Many countries have been in this position before. The country has lost access to the private capital markets. It is therefore pursuing a policy of looking to its bilateral partners to try to provide the funding that will allow it to get over what it hopes is a difficult period. Politicians in this situation, in my experience, suddenly develop a profound belief in the efficacy of prayer. They hope that inflows from bilateral partners, or in some cases multilateral partners, will be sufficient to tide the country over during the period when the country implements a homegrown fiscal adjustment program. Now, sometimes that works. Often it does not work. Fiscal adjustment programs, as my colleague on the panel just said, are inherently distasteful. Whether they are homegrown or recommended, quote unquote, by the International Monetary Fund, they will involve a degree of pain. And they would require, for example, the stripping off of subsidies on various commodities that may have become quite embedded in the economy. Homegrown adjustment programs of that kind often become casualties of the political process. Politicians simply will not have the stamina to push them through to their eventual success. It is often the case that local politicians find the intervention of someone like the IMF quite helpful, because they can say, we, your elected leaders, are not the authors of your misery. That is being prescribed by this multilateral institution. To be sure, we are a member of that institution, but we are in effect taking the doctor's medicine, but we are not prescribing it ourselves. In many cases, politicians find that quite a useful position to be in. The issue, it seems to me, for Sri Lanka comes down to this. Is there a plausible set of fiscal adjustment measures that you folks could implement in a reasonable time period, the next 2 or 3 years, which would return the country to voluntary market access, private capital market access? If there is such a set of policies, and if you think you have the stamina to push them through, then perhaps it makes sense to try to bridge this difficult period through borrowings from your bilateral partners. One final comment. The country's existing creditors will view your actions now with a degree of suspicion. Any new lender, whether private or bilateral, is of course lending into an obviously distressed situation. They will expect, therefore, that their new loans into a distressed situation will be regarded as senior to existing legacy exposure. And therefore, existing creditors may view these new credit facilities as effectively subordinating them. Perhaps not at law. Perhaps no one is going to say in the contracts this debt is senior to all pre-existing debt. But in a practical sense, the question will worry existing creditors whether this policy effectively subordinates them to the new lending. I'll stop there, Madam Chairman.